Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And welcome back to another edition of Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. And today we're talking about books and writing and probably prairie chicken dances as well with Dawn Dumont, based in Saskatchewan, I assume. The Prairie Chicken Dance Tour is her latest publication. So hello, Dawn Dumont. What's new with you?
First of all, thanks for having me on, Dennis. I really appreciate it. It's always good to meet a fellow reader.
And let's start with your early life. Where were you born and raised and went to school, all that kind of good stuff?
I was born in Belcarra, Saskatchewan, near my reserve, and I was raised on the Okanese First Nation, which is located in southern Saskatchewan. We're mostly Cree, and it's like a smallish reserve, probably about like maybe 700 members, like in all. That's on and off reserve. So I spent like most of my early years walking to my cousin's house, and which was probably like about 20 minutes away, and that was pretty much it. Walking to my cousin's house and back, that was our life. We grew up next to my uncle who had a ranch, and he had horses and chickens and pigs and ducks and just everything. So it was pretty, maybe a little bit atypical of growing up on the reserve, because we just had we had so much animals and stuff like that.
Well, it sounds kind of like your lead character, John Grey Eyes, a retired cowboy with his ranch and his horses and stuff like that.
Absolutely. He was based on my Uncle Frankie, who had started his ranch and sort of taught us all how to ride and barrel race and all that fun stuff. And although I don't think my uncle was struggling with his sexual identity, but he was definitely the inspiration for the character.
Well, that was another question. Dawn Dumont is with us. A number of books she has out, including the first one, Nobody Cries at Bingo. So what was your inspiration for your writing and also your comedy?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, I always grew up like cracking jokes with my family. Like, my dad loved humor. He was constantly watching stand-up comedians. He loved to laugh. And around the supper table, that was kind of one of the challenges, was being able to make my dad laugh. But all my siblings, very, very funny people. They're all jokesters. And then our cousins were all into making people laugh. So laughter just sort of became, a way to communicate, and maybe even a unit of currency. Like, if you can make people laugh, then, people liked you a little more. So, I think that's sort of where it came from. And then when I was in my early 20s, I started writing plays, and I got to hang out with a lot of funny actors like Herbie Barnes and Daryl Dennis and Jennifer Podemsky. And so in meeting them and seeing how funny they were and stuff like that, it really inspired me to start performing some of my own comedy. And they encouraged me all the time to do stand-up. And so once I did stand-up, and that's a whole little world unto itself, and I just really enjoyed performing for many years. And then I switched into books because I just wanted to put those two things together, like the writing and then the humor. So that's what those early books were. And I was really heavily inspired too by David Sedaris, who had entertained me for many hours.
And that was your first book, Nobody Cries at Bingo. So what's the attraction of bingo to people? I don't get it myself. I don't get it.
Oh, I am the same with you. I don't get it either. I went to so many bingos when I was a kid, and I thought there was a magic to it, but it requires extreme patience. And then when I was a young teen, I used to work bingos, and so I was around bingos most of my life, and to the point now where I have this like weird thing where if I'm in a bingo for more than say 2 minutes, I instantly fall asleep. Just like I'm just completely overtaken. I don't know what the heck it is, but there's something about bingos now that I just find just like deadly. I have deadly aversion to them. But I think what it is that it's a way to chat and at the same time to gamble. And I think for people who sort of like, are kind of in the middle of a lot of different forces in their lives, gambling is sort of a way to settle the score, like the idea that you can control luck by doing certain things. And I think that maybe the less control over your life you have, the more you're attracted to things like bingo and other types of gambling. That's my psychological spin on it.
Could be. And then you went from high school to U of S. What did you study at the University of Saskatchewan?
Well, I started out in business. I was really interested in getting a commerce degree, but I think I mostly just went into commerce because it sounded important. And then once I got there, I was like, "Good God, this is super boring." And I just started taking more and more English classes, and so I actually ended up with an English degree. But I graduated from the College of Commerce, so I think I'm the only person who's ever done that because I just never filed the paperwork to get into arts and science. So that's how I ended up in commerce.
And I first ran across your writings in That's What She Said in the Star Phoenix a while back, the newspaper in Saskatoon, and I would just collapse myself with laughter sometimes at some of your stuff. So the column came after some of your books?
Oh yes, it came after. When I moved to Saskatoon in 2012, I guess sort of returned home. I started writing for Eagle Feather News and had the column there, and then with the permission of my publisher there, I ended up at the Star Phoenix after that. So yeah, I think by that time I'd already written Glass Beads. So it was like, I think I'd already done like 3 books by that point. But yeah, writing a column is always lots of fun. It's sort of like you save up all these jokes and then, quickly in like a 2-hour period, you like write an article about it.
And then you got a law degree at Queen's University. That's in Kingston, is it?
Yes, I did that. Law 98, and that was a nice experience. It's a beautiful law school for sure, and just a beautiful place to live. Lots of class differences, and it was a good introduction to the East in sort of a smaller little world. And then I think I got the confidence from living there to then move to Toronto, and then from there to New York City, and then I came home to Edmonton later after that.
New York City? What'd you do in the Big Apple? Because I really like that place.
Oh, I was like, that was when I was really, really into stand-up. And I think it was probably it was my first year stand-up. I moved to New York. For sure, I thought, I'd be on the David Letterman show in 6 months. But it was just a real experience. It was just like a very interesting experience of, like New York, although it has like all that wealth, there's a large amount of people who are very poor and who had kind of like lived lives of poverty for most of their lives. And it was kind of interesting to see the limits that they'd already placed on their lives just from growing up there. Like there are people who lived in Brooklyn who never went to Manhattan and couldn't even imagine like living in Manhattan, or and I'd be like, you just have to apply for an apartment and save up 3 months rent and there you are. But there was a real America has a real classist society, and America does not protect its citizens whatsoever. Like if you had to engage with any of the basic services, it was just shocking how little investment there was in protecting their own citizens. It was just I still cannot believe the level of services. I had to do a little bit of paperwork when I moved to New York, and I remember standing in line for 8 hours, and you couldn't sit down. You couldn't lean against the wall. You couldn't drink anything or eat anything. And I remember just thinking, what are we all being punished for? And I actually while standing in that line, I actually like made friends with everybody, and like, we took turns holding the line when someone had to go to the bathroom. It was just, America is a very, very tough place.
That's right. I lived in Washington State for nearly 20 years, but that was a bit better. It's a more laid back out there in Bellingham, north of Seattle and south of Vancouver. So it's just kind of like Surrey south a little bit. The book that we're talking about now is The Hilarious Story of an Unlikely Group of Indigenous Dancers Who Find Themselves Thrown Together on a Performance Tour of Europe. It's the Prairie Chicken Dance Tour. Do you dance at all like the people in your book?
I do. I dance fancy dance, women's fancy dance, and I haven't done it in a few years, but it was always my dream to learn it. And I was actually taught by a young man who knew all the dances as well. So it's sort of like, so that was also sort of an inspiration for John. And learning it was just it was so beautiful to have that connection to our culture. And that's what I like about dance is that, some of it is new, some of it is old. Sometimes you don't even know how old it is,
right.
Some of those dances.
Well, the Prairie Chicken Dance I've seen performed, and it's like a broad interpretation of a chicken like scratching at the ground looking for grubs and worms and prancing around and flapping its wings, stuff like that. Is that kind of what I'm getting from it?
Yeah, although they don't actually do that. They don't do a dance like that, I think. And I actually haven't seen that one. The one I'm more familiar with which is more of a prairie dance, is the sneak up dance, which is where it's actually like where hunters, the dancers pretend to be hunters sneaking up on chickens. So that's more what I'm the approach I'm more used to, or the dance I'm more used to.
And what's a fancy dance?
Fancy dance was introduced like in the late 60s. It's one of the later additions to sort of dancing, and it's very. It was more like this was the kind of dance that they wanted, people to pay to see, that kind of thing. So it's just like the fastest dance. It's very high energy. The male dancers will do flips and like acrobatic movements in it. The female fancy dancers, they have a shawl, and then their movements are supposed to more like mimic like a butterfly. But it's also very fast paced, and there's lots of jumping, hops, spins. So they're the more exciting of the dances.
Gotcha. So back to your day-to-day life. You have a day job, correct?
That's right, I do.
And how do you find time to write?
Oh God, it's always a struggle. Like I think for years I didn't even have an idea of what a weekend was. Like, what do you do on a weekend? You think as an adult woman, I'm like, if I'm not writing, I'm like, oh, what other things do people do? So yeah, I would just wake up early on a Saturday and write. That's pretty much how I get all my books done, is wake up early and write. I think it's really important that, you put, since you're high, most of your energy, for me anyway, is in the morning, then the thing that is the most important should be done in the morning. So that's basically, anywhere from like 5:30 till 7, that's my writing time. And then on the weekends, probably from like 9 to 11.
And the book, the new one, is The Prairie Chicken Dance Tour by Dawn Dumont. It's from Freehand Books. How did that connection with Freehand Books come around?
Just totally. I got an agent about 4 years ago, back in 2018. I finally found an agent, and that was just a sweet story. I was following Alicia Elliott, the writer, on Twitter. And I knew that she had an agent because she's very successful. And so I had written to her and asked her if she would recommend me to an agent. And this is something I had done probably 4 or 5 times over the years. And either people didn't have agents or they just didn't want to recommend me. And Alicia was amazing. I asked her in the same afternoon. She had introduced me to her agent, Stephanie. And then Stephanie called me, and we started talking, and I think she signed me probably a few days later. And then she's the one who negotiated the arrangement with Freehand Books.
And that's the current book. Do you have another one in mind, or are you working on something?
I've got a couple books. that I'm working on. One of them is a sequel to Rose's Run, and then the other one I'd written during the pandemic. I had been writing it for a while, but I finished the first draft during the pandemic, and that one is about a woman with different abilities. She's in a wheelchair, and she's actually sort of solves small crimes in her community. She's more of a homeless person, transient person, and so she solves crimes for her community, and then she gets on the trail of a serial killer and solves that mystery.
Ah, so it seems like lots of lawyers like to write and vice versa, because I assume that law school, you have to do lots of writing and clear and concise writing. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. You definitely have to be concise. You definitely have to argue a viewpoint. I think there is a difference between the writing, but I think maybe what attracts lawyers to the writing is just their sense of because sometimes there are stories that you can't, you hear, but you can never do anything with them. I mean, when you're a lawyer, people come to you and just tell you they're, this horrible thing that's happening to them, and maybe you can help them or maybe you can't help them, but that story stays with you. Just like, growing up in a reserve, I must have heard millions of stories, and sometimes you find a place to put them, and sometimes they just sit there and linger, and you hope that you find a place to put them before your time is done.
And hope for the best. What kind of tips do you have for would-be writers, beginning writers, even people who've done it for a while? What can you suggest from your experiences?
I would say just write every day. Don't get too caught up. Don't edit when you're writing. I think that's ridiculous. It's one of my pet peeves when people come to me about a project. Because remember, at the end of the day, when you're writing a book, the goal is to finish the book, not to write the most perfect chapter in the world. I think people worry too much about how perfect it is. One thing I learned from stand-up is when you're performing, you should always imagine that you're performing to someone who likes you, and someone I used to write one of my best friend's names at the top of my joke sheet, and not like any best friend, like one that laughs all the time. So I think that every day when you're writing, try to imagine that person that you're writing to, and so then it becomes more like a conversation with a good friend. Also writing, and I learned this from Sheldon Rosen. He's a playwright sort of from the Toronto area. And in one of his workshops, he said that you should write as though you are remembering, not like you're just creating. Because I think people feel like, oh, where am I going to get these pieces? But if you think of it as I'm just remembering something, the pieces are all there. You just have to put them down on paper.
Gotcha. And I like that about writing for one person, because I have lots of years in radio, and that's the thing, you're speaking to one person, not a vast universe, and not everybody is listening like, hi everybody. No, it's one person. In fact, I worked with a guy who had a picture up in front of the microphone of a person that was close to him, and that's kind of who he talked to, except it was over the air.
That's beautiful.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
That is, and I would say every young writer should do that, or every new writer should do that. They should have a picture of the person that they're writing to.
Perfect idea. How about yourself? When you're not writing or working, who do you like to read, or what do you like to read?
Well, I read pretty much everything. I don't. I'm a big fan of. Nonfiction. I love reading anything political. I love political stories. I read Barack Obama's book. Did you know that book actually saved publishing? Because it sold so many copies.
Oh, good.
It kept the publishing industry going during the pandemic. I read Jody Wilson-Rayboux's new book, Indian in the Cabinet. I love romance novels. Well, I don't love them. There's only one romance novelist I really like, and it's because she's so funny and witty in her conversations, and she also has a real good understanding of psychology, and that's Eliza James. She's a fantastic writer. I mentioned Alicia Elliott before. Huge fan. Her work is like, even though it's like nonfiction, and it's prose, it reads like poetry, Like her wisdom is just way, way, way beyond her years. I've always been really a big fan of her. David Sedaris for his sense of humor. I've always, from David, I learned that like the worst day of your life could end up being like the funniest thing you've ever written in your life, So, keep journaling and store it away. That's another tip I would have for writers is to journal. Your life is going to be partly what's going to be out there on the page, but also your ability to analyze and interpret things, I think, is also, and observe. That's always really important as a writer.
And this is Dawn Dumont, and before we wrap it up, Dawn, you've got the Prairie Chicken Dance Tour. What are the other books that are out there from your pen?
Well, there's Glass Beads, which I would say is it's a book of short stories, but they're all interconnected. And I think I put the most of myself into those stories. And then Rose's Run, which was just an absolute delight to write, it's like a fun supernatural romp, and that's a woman whose life seems like the worst it can possibly get, but she picks herself up and makes a victory out of everything. And so I really enjoyed that story, and that's kind of why I wanted to go back to the characters again and write the sequel. And then, of course, Nobody Cries at Bingo, which is a collection of short stories, very inspired by David Sedaris and his family. And, a dysfunctional family and how things sort of like interconnect. And then you see a little bit of the colonialism and poverty and racism just sort of woven through the stories and, the impact that it had on my little family.
Gotcha, and that's Dawn Dumont, and if you haven't read any of her books yet, you should, and grab the Prairie Chicken Dance Tour while it's hot, because it's just hilarious. Plus, it's interesting and informative at the same time. That one character who's a Catholic, I don't understand why she would want to be a Catholic based on, kind of like the history behind the Catholic Church and its involvement in prairie life, but that's your character, right?
I understand that, and I've seen that in a review as well, and I find that there's so many staunch Catholics, that I grew up with. My family actually attended Catholic church all the time, and until I was probably 18, I considered myself Catholic. But it was at that time that they were uncovering so much of the sexual abuse and the fact that the Catholic Church had hidden it away and just moved priests instead of instead of firing them or getting them into counseling or really confronting or really being honest about what was happening. And I just could not forgive them for exposing little children to that kind of stuff. And that's even before, the enormity of the stuff that happened at residential school was coming out. So I could say I was an early adopter for rejecting the church. But at the same time, I do have family members who, they seek solace, they find support in their beliefs, their Christian beliefs. And so I think that's sort of what I was trying to get at with the character, that the same people who abused her also gave her the tools to withstand the abuse or to survive it or cope with it.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm not trying to knock anyone's religion or beliefs. I'm just kind of wondering about that character because she doesn't like romance novels or Westerns with salacious covers or anything with the word desperate in the title. So.
Oh, yeah, she's quite a prude. Yes, that's for sure.
Dawn Dumont, it's been a delight. So thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate this. And it was very fun.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.